Welcome. It is Thursday, May 9th, 2024. So glad you could join me as I talk about the latest articles related to growth and marketing. And what are we talking about today? Well, I want to start a conversation around open and honest communication. And why is that? Because communication and trust are two critical factors in both the buying process and in retention. So I have a couple of articles that provide examples on how to be open and honest in your communication. First up, Jason Widup talks failure. Then John Bonini urges us to share the process, not just the end results. And then we move on to talk about how to start assessing your marketing maturity, your company's marketing maturity. And then finally, I end with a post from Paul Stringer where he shares some data about what marketing thinks it's responsible for versus what the CEO thinks and the sales team. So some interesting insights there as well. Let's get started. Okay, I want to start off with this post from Jason Widup. And so I like this post a lot because as it relates to open and honest communication, Jason shared a failure. And if you're on LinkedIn, it seems like 99.9% of the things win. And you know that's just not true. If you're in marketing, if you're winning that much, you're playing it too safe. But it's important to set the context that there are failures here. And so let's just take a look at this post. He says, a lot of my marketing experiments fail, even when I feel really confident about them. So I was trying to run a lot of experiments, assuming 2/3 of them will fail. And I like this because, Jason's presenting this post to clients. I mean, his prospective clients are going to see this. And so when you see this, and it's not always success, what do you think? You think, well, this guy's fairly trustworthy. He's fairly honest. He's sharing his failures. He's not just saying we win every single time. And so that's a key component to selling, is that people trust who they're doing business with. He said, this is one I was sure would work, but it didn't. My client had a relationship with someone in their space who had written a book that was very relevant to our target audience. My idea was to ask her if I could purchase a bunch of her books and have her personally sign them to people in our target account list, like write their name and the company they worked at and a nice little message right in the book. We would then take a picture of her message signature and use it in an outbound email campaign just to try and get them to acknowledge it and give us their address so we could send it to them. Highly personalized and not something that could be scaled. Brilliant, or so I thought. The first person we outbounded to was like, why would you do this? And we had trouble getting anyone to respond. We maybe got a handful of people, like 7 to respond out of 30 we were testing with. And it's not like I could do anything else with these books because they were personally signed to a person at a specific company. So we just found the business address for the rest of the folks and sent the books directly to them, hoping they would get them. And so this works on 2 levels. One, I talked about building trust, like because he's communicating his failures, it makes him look trustworthy because he's not just saying we win every time, which we know is not true. This looks a lot more truthful. And so as trust is a critical component of sales, this really helps on that front. But then even if we think from a success standpoint when working with clients, I mean, this really frames the work that he's going to do. It would be wrong for him to go into a client and say, hey, I'm going to run a bunch of experiments and they're all going to win. If he set that expectation, his clients can be disappointed. But instead, he's saying, look, I'm going to run a lot of experiments and a lot of them are going to fail. But we're still going to get to a successful place in the end through that process. And so by saying this, he's really managing the expectation. So you can see through this example how this works both from a sales perspective, because it helps build trust with Jason. Because he's not just saying the positive things, he's giving truth here. And then how it helps from a retention standpoint, because he's going to deliver on what he's talking about here. He's going to run a lot of tests. A lot of them are going to fail. But through that process, they're ultimately going to win. And so the client's not going to be disappointed. They're not going to be like, hey, Jason, when you came on board here, I thought every test was going to win. I thought everything was going to be a victory. No, they're going to understand his process in much greater detail. So this works both on the sales front and from a retention standpoint and customer satisfaction standpoint. So thanks, Jason, for sharing that. I think it's a good insight for others. Okay, next I want to take a look at this post from John Bonini. He says, share the process, not just the final result. And he goes through a list of items like share your rebrand, share how you launch your newsletter, share that process behind it. And the reason for this, he says, is because what I've seen resonate more and more is content around the process for building, launching, creating new things. What's the insight that led to the change? What challenge did you run into? What did you learn along the way? This is what people relate to. This is what inspires and motivates change in your audience. And I think this is absolutely true. I mean, when you share the process, it does resonate with others, but it's not just are you able to help others do the thing that you're doing. It also works from a sales perspective because people can see how you develop your product. People can see how you do your work. And that helps build that relationship. When they get that insight into what you did to get to the final result, it's very powerful. It helps build that connection. It helps, understand what went into this. And so that's really critical. And what I like to say, I mean, I love it when people share both the process, the methodology of how they got there, and the results. And so I think there's a couple of good points in here. Is one is showing your work is good from, sharing with prospects what you do to get to the end result. And so they're able to, that resonates with them. But it's also great just in terms of helping others out if you share your methodology and then share the results so they can understand how to do a similar thing. So that's a great post, John. I totally dig it. Okay, next I want to talk about this article from my company. The title is Assessing Marketing Maturity and Competitive Analysis. And the first paragraph is a major part of Mosaic's growth marketing assessment is the marketing maturity analysis, in which we seek to understand and benchmark the sophistication of an organization's marketing-led growth strategy and capabilities, as well as that of its direct competitors. Doing this is the first step in understanding how much opportunity an organization has to build, optimize, and scale a marketing-led growth motion. It also helps identify specific areas where the company can improve performance and see short-term impact on growth. Now, I know there's a lot of discussion about how closely you should look at your competitors, but I'm here to tell you it's really important. First up, understanding how your company ranks compared to your competitors can be an indicator of future growth. In a previous video, I shared Les Benet's share of search metric and how he developed that. And that metric is the number of searches for your company's brand relative to the number of searches for all the companies, for your competitors' companies' brands. And if your brand searches are growing, that could be a sign that your company is going to grow. And so it's really important to understand how your company ranks with relative to your competitors. I mean, it's just proven with the data. But if we expand that and look at how your company actually performs across multiple channels, it's even more instructive. And so we like to take an outside look. Even though we have access to our clients' data, we don't take a look at that at this phase of the assessment. We really compare apples to apples using external data to see how it's performing. And so this really gives a view of how prospects would view these different brands as they're trying to make a decision, which is really important to understand whether your brand would be selected as a solution. And so we look at these different channels: organic search, paid strategy, social media, content marketing, brand authority, and website. And this is more of a subjective view based on our experience of working with many, many different B2B SaaS companies. Like, what are best practices? How do these companies stack up against best practices? And then what we'll do is do a competitive analysis and actually look at some of the data using different third-party tools to see how it's performing from a data perspective. And so this provides a complete picture of how your company is performing against competitors. And this will help identify opportunities for growth, because what frequently happens almost every single time is that there will be things that competitors are doing to drive growth that our client is not taking advantage of. And so that quickly identifies opportunities to drive growth and how much growth it can drive. Because if you see the competitors doing this, who's selling to the same ICP, then this is an opportunity for you to drive growth as well. So this complete picture of how mature your company is in your marketing efforts relative to your competitors is a really powerful factor in ultimately driving growth. And then it helps you understand what the potential is for growth using some of these metrics, because you can see where your competitors are, what they're doing, And then you can see what your company's potential is for growth. So I know there's discussion over how important it is to look at your competitors, but I'm here to tell you right now, it is very important. All the data supports this. And so this should be a first step in assessing what your potential is for growth and opportunities to actually drive that growth. And so that's why this is a core component of our assessment. Okay, next up, I want to talk about this post from Paul Stringer. And he shares some really interesting data that was produced by Capero. And this talks about what marketing's areas of responsibility and how marketing views their area of responsibility versus the CEO and the sales team. And so, like you look here, I'll expand this a little bit. In media strategy, marketing thinks they own it. Like this is their responsibility. The CEO a little less, and the sales team a little bit less. And there's a few key points in this table that I wanted to highlight. First, branding. Now, branding is a tough term because who knows exactly what that means. Marketing thinks they pretty much just own branding, so that the CEO and sales team generally agree. But I'm here to tell you right now, brand should be owned by the entire company. Everyone should feel ownership of the brand of the company. It should not be delegated just to marketing. And this is just absolutely critical in terms of driving growth. It's the entire experience of interacting with your company that reflects your brand. So, like I said, branding is a tough term because who knows exactly how people are defining branding. But if it's in any way related to the company's brand, then this should be owned by the entire organization and not just reside in marketing. But then the other point I wanted to highlight is that so these areas in green, marketing really thinks they largely own. What's interesting is in this in the areas that marketing thinks they own, the other area, the CEO and the sales team think they have less responsibility in there. So marketing is a little overconfident in saying we own these areas. The CEO and sales team are like, no, marketing doesn't own it to the extent that they think they do. But on the flip side, what's really interesting is in the areas where marketing thinks they have less responsibility or co-responsibility, the CEO thinks marketing has more responsibility than marketing does. So if you're like, hey, customer satisfaction, we don't feel like we have much responsibility in there, the CEO actually thinks you have more responsibility there. So it's important thinking about internal company dynamics is that yes, you may feel like you have less responsibility as a marketing team, but others have higher expectations, especially the CEO. And in areas where you think you really own it, you may need to be a little bit more collaborative based on how the CEO views it. So, a couple of interesting points here. What Paul specifically, the reason why he posted this though, is because he says pricing is one of those areas where marketers can most tangibly point to the impact of brand, but not enough do. And so that's why he's highlighting this. Pricing, marketing feels they have very low responsibility, 2.1. And so, but this is a mistake. Pricing is so critical in terms of growing your business, and just to check out of pricing is a mistake for marketers. So definitely keep that in mind. Like, what can you do to contribute on the pricing discussions? Pricing in general is not talked about enough. You see very little content around pricing. And for marketing to say, hey, we're out of this or have very low responsibility is a mistake. We need to, as marketers, be more involved in these pricing discussions because it is a major factor in acquisition and driving growth. 3 great points related to grow your company today. We want to focus on open and honest communication. We can do that by sharing our failures, not just our successes. And we also want to share the details of our process, not just the final result. And finally, when you're assessing your company's marketing maturity, take an outside perspective. Compare yourself against your competitors, apples to apples. And that will give you a better understanding of what your prospects are seeing. All right, I'll see you tomorrow.